This story is titled, My Twin Sister and I Graduated from High School, but our parents gave her a trip to Hawaii, leaving me at home when they returned. They were shocked to see the expensive car that someone had given me for graduation. Hey everyone! So, I've been holding this in for a while and figured it's time to put it out there. My name's Natalie, 18 female, and I'm a twin. My sister Mia and I are only a few minutes apart, but honestly, it feels like we're living in different worlds. Everyone assumes twins are equals. Two halves of the same coin. Not in my case. With my family, Mia's the star, and I'm just the extra. Let me lay some background. Growing up in our house wasn't bad if you didn't mind playing second fiddle. Our parents, Linda and Robert Hayes, are classic suburban parents. Mom's a real estate agent, who looks like she lives for open houses and client lunches. Dad's an accountant, who runs his own little firm. Together, they're all about appearances. Nice house, perfect lawn, good schools. It's all about keeping up the image. But the image only really worked if Mia was front and center. I started noticing the difference in treatment when we were little. It wasn't obvious at first, more like a pattern that only became clear over time. Mia always got the shiny new things, while I got the leftovers. Like when we went shopping for school supplies, Mia would get the cool Lisa Frank folders and gel pens, and I'd end up with the generic stuff from the bargain bin. The holidays made it even clearer. Mia got the toys everyone wanted. I remember one Christmas when she got this huge Barbie dream house, and I got some off-brand doll that looked like it came from a garage sale. I didn't say anything, and my parents thought I'm okay with that. Even on our birthdays, Mia's gifts were flashier, and the decorations always felt like they were picked just for her. At first, I tried not to let it bother me. I thought, it's just stuff, right? But it wasn't just about the material things. It was how they treated her versus how they treated me. Mom would light up when Mia walked into a room, asking about her day, her friends, her school projects. When I tried to chime in, their attention would drift, like they couldn't wait for me to finish talking. It wasn't all bad, though. School was my escape. While Mia was busy being the center of attention at home, I buried myself in my studies. I was a good student. No, a great one. I aced my tests, finished assignments early, and always got glowing comments from my teachers. At first, I thought my parents might notice and maybe, just maybe, be proud of me, but they didn't. The only time they seemed to pay attention was when my success made Mia uncomfortable. She hated it when teachers called me the smart one, or when I got awards at school. I remember one time in middle school when I got a certificate for academic excellence. I was so excited, but Mia couldn't stand it. It's not that big a deal, she said. They give those to everyone. Her jealousy got worse in high school. I was taking honors classes and earning top grades. I'm kinda nerd, I won't lie. Meanwhile, Mia was more about popularity and sports. Not to say she wasn't smart, she could do well when she tried, but she didn't put in the effort. And yet, our parents still acted like she walked on water. One thing that really drove me crazy was how much money they spent on her. Mia got everything she wanted: designer clothes, extracurricular activities, and endless support. When she wanted to try ballet, they paid for lessons, costumes, and recitals. When I asked if I could take art classes, I got a flat, "We can't afford that." Somehow the budget always stretched for Mia's interests, but never for mine. Even when it came to chores, things were uneven. Mia hardly lifted a finger. If she did one small thing, Mom would shower her with praise. Meanwhile, I'd clean the entire kitchen and barely get a thanks. It wasn't just unfair. It was exhausting. I was feeling invisible. There were times I wondered if I could do something amazing, win a science fair, get a scholarship, solve world hunger, and they'd still only see Mia. That feeling of being unseen started to weigh on me, but I didn't know how to handle it. When I was 12, I overheard something that cemented it for me. I couldn't sleep and went downstairs for a drink of water. My parents were talking in the living room, their voices low but clear enough for me to catch. "Sometimes I think it would have been easier if we didn't have twins," Dad said. Mia would have been enough. My heart dropped. I stood there, my tears runned on my face. Mom didn't even argue. Instead, she sighed and said, "Mia's special. She's going to do great things. Natalie, well, she's fine." I felt something inside me shifted. That's when I realized there was no point in trying to win their approval. I'd never be Mia. And to them, that meant I'd never be enough. From that day on, I decided to focus on myself. I stopped caring about their validation and poured all my energy into school. If they didn't want to see me, fine. I'd make sure the rest of the world did. High school was a game changer. I took every advanced class I could and joined academic clubs. My teachers noticed my dedication and encouraged me. I got awards, scholarships, and recognition that I knew my parents would never give me. Funny thing is, the more I succeeded, the more it bothered Mia. She couldn't stand it when teachers praised me or when I got asked to tutor other students. She'd roll her eyes and mutter, "teacher's pet," under her breath. Sometimes she'd even tell our parents I was showing off, but I didn't care. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, I was doing it for me. By the time college admissions rolled around, I knew I had a shot at getting into a top school. I worked hard on my applications, stayed up late writing essays, and made sure every detail was perfect. I wasn't just dreaming of leaving, I was preparing for it. Meanwhile, Mia barely tried. She applied to a state school that didn't require much effort and spent most of her time hanging out with friends. Our parents didn't seem to mind. Mia's got other talents, Mom said once, as if that excused her laziness. As I waited for my acceptance letters, I couldn't help but feel a little hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, getting into a great college would finally make my parents see me. But deep down, I wasn't holding my breath. So, acceptance season finally rolled around, and I got the email I'd been waiting for. Columbia University. Full acceptance. My heart was racing when I saw the letter. After all the late nights, essays, and the ridiculous mountain of applications, it finally felt like my hard work had paid off. I printed the letter and brought it home thinking, maybe this will be it. Maybe this will be the thing that makes them see me. I know it's dumb, but a small part of me really thought my parents might finally look at me with some actual pride instead of the usual indifference. When I got home, though, I could already tell something was off. Mia was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Mom and Dad were at the dining table, their heads close together, surrounded by brochures. They didn't even look up when I came in. "Hey, I have some news," I said, holding up the acceptance letter. "Not now, Natalie," Mom said, waving me off without even glancing in my direction. "We're busy." That stung. "Busy with what?" I asked. "Hawaii," Mia said, smirking as she dragged the word out like it was some inside joke I wasn't in on. "Hawaii?" I repeated. My first thought was, wait, are we going on a family vacation? I started feeling a little excited. "What's going on?" Mom didn't even look up from the table. "Just something special," she said, sounding way too casual. I stood there, hoping for more. Like, hello? A little context, please? But nope, nothing. Finally, Mia rolled her eyes. "Mom and Dad are planning a trip. You don't need to worry about it." Okay, that threw me off. Why wouldn't I need to worry about it? It's a family trip, right? Of course I'm included, right? I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself, you're overthinking it. It's probably just a surprise for everyone. But later that night, as I was heading to bed, I heard them talking again in the kitchen. "It's going to be perfect," Mom was saying, her voice full of excitement. "Mia deserves something special before college. She's worked so hard." Worked hard? Mia barely did the bare minimum to get into state college. But okay, sure. Dad agreed. Just the three of us. It'll be a nice family getaway. Just the three of us. And there it was. They weren't planning a family trip. They were planning their trip, a celebration for Mia, and I wasn't even part of the equation. I looked at the acceptance letter sitting on my desk. The excitement I'd felt earlier was gone. Instead, I felt this dull, empty ache. I wanted to confront them. But what was the point? I already knew what they'd say. The next day, I tried to piece together more details. I overheard snippets of conversations, caught Mia talking to her friends about beaches and resorts, and saw a confirmation email on Mom's open laptop. A week in Hawaii at some 5-star hotel. Flights already booked. They didn't even bother hiding it from me. Not even giving any excuse, just business as usual. Like I wasn't even there. I kept my head down and went about my day. But inside, I was fuming. It wasn't just about the trip. It was about what it represented. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I'd always be second place. Mia, of course, couldn't resist rubbing it in. Every chance she got, she'd drop little hints. "Mom says I'm going to love snorkeling," she'd say, looking right at me. Or, "I can't wait to see the sunsets there. They're supposed to be incredible." I ignored her. If she wanted a reaction, she wasn't going to get it from me. A few days before the trip, I decided to see my school counselor for advice. I told her about my acceptance to Columbia and how my parents were ignoring it while celebrating Mia's Hawaii trip. She listened and told me I should be proud of my achievements. I thought that was the end of it. But you know that you cannot trust school counselors at all? I don't know why I even told her. I guess I was desperate. The next day, Mom came home furious. "Natalie, what lies did you tell your counselor?" she snapped. "What are you talking about?" I asked, confused. "She called me. She said you're making it sound like we don't care about you or support you. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is?" "I didn't lie," I said quietly. I told her the truth, that you're ignoring me and celebrating Mia. Her face turned red. "Ungrateful. That's what you are. We've given you everything, and now you're trying to make us look bad? You've always been jealous of Mia." She stormed out, leaving me standing there. No matter what I did, I'd always be the problem. And this incident didn't even got my mom thinking maybe she's making a mistake, or maybe I am hurt. She didn't give a shit. The morning of their trip came faster than I expected. I was in the kitchen making breakfast when I heard them loading their suitcases into the car. Mia walked in looking like she was already in vacation mode. "Don't worry, sis," she said. "I'll send you pictures. So you can live vicariously through me." My mom told me to take care of the house before she got in the car. My dad gave me a quick goodbye wave. As the car pulled out of the driveway, I watched from the window. For a split second, I felt a pang of sadness. Not because I wanted to go to Hawaii, but because it was another reminder of where I stood in their eyes. And yeah, that's it. My family are off to Hawaii, celebrating a milestone of my twin, like she was the only one in the family with accomplishments. Meanwhile, I am here, left to take care of the house like some live-in maid. Part of me wants to be furious, to scream and yell and break something, but mostly I just feel stuck. I don't want to feel like this anymore. I don't want to keep swallowing their treatment like it's normal or something I just have to accept, but I don't know what to do. Right now, I'm stuck between wanting to prove my worth to them and realizing I shouldn't have to. I shouldn't need to beg for basic respect or acknowledgement. But how do you let go of something you've been chasing your whole life? I'm open to any advice or suggestions because, honestly, I feel lost. If you've got any ideas, I'm all ears. Update 1. Hey everyone, it's me again. After everything that's happened, I'm sitting here realizing I've spent way too much of my life waiting for things to change. Waiting for my parents to notice me. Waiting for Mia to stop being the center of their universe. Waiting for someone to say, "Hey Natalie, you matter too." But you know what? I'm done waiting. Once they were gone, the house was eerily quiet. I sat on the couch, trying to figure out what to do next. That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. I don't even know how it came into my mind. When I was younger, I overheard Mom having this heated argument on the phone. She was talking to her brother, Uncle Jack. She said he was a bad influence and an embarrassment, and she basically told him to stay out of her life. At the time, I didn't think much of it. I barely knew anything about him, except that he lived nearby and wasn't part of our family picture-perfect bubble. But sitting there in that empty house, it hit me. Maybe Jack was exactly the person I needed to talk to. Someone who'd been pushed out of their lives for not fitting into their mold. Someone who might actually understand what it feels like to be on the outside looking in. Grabbing my laptop, I did a quick search and found his address. It wasn't far, just a few miles away. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. I honestly needed to go somewhere anyway. I didn't know what I was expecting when I got there. His house was small and modest, with a front yard full of overgrown plants. I hesitated for a moment, then knocked on the door. When he answered, I froze. He looked older than I'd imagined, with gray streaks in his hair and a worn flannel shirt. For a second, I thought I'd made a mistake. "Can I help you?" he asked, his brow furrowing. Hi, I said awkwardly. "I'm Natalie, Linda's daughter." His eyes widened. "Linda's daughter?" He stared at me for a moment, then smiled. "Well, I'll be damned. Come on in." The inside of his house was cluttered but cozy. He led me to the kitchen, where he poured us both cups of coffee. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "what brings you here?" I hesitated, unsure how much to say. "It's complicated. Let's just say things aren't great at home." "Linda always was a piece of work," Jack said with a dry laugh, shaking his head. "I'm not surprised things turned out this way. She's been like that for as long as I can remember." I was confused and curious. "What do you mean?" His expression shifted slightly, something between frustration and sadness. "Let's just say your mom's got her priorities, and they don't always include doing the right thing." He glanced at me, almost like he wanted to say more but stopped himself. "Just keep in mind, Natalie, you're not the first person in this family to get pushed aside for speaking the truth." So there I was, sitting in Uncle Jack's kitchen, sipping coffee and spilling parts of my life story to someone I barely knew. I didn't mean to unload so much, but once I started talking, it all just came pouring out. I told him about Colombia, about how hard I'd worked to get in, and about how my parents barely seemed to notice. I wasn't planning on mentioning the Hawaii thing, but it slipped out. "They're on a trip right now," I said. "A family trip. Except, I wasn't invited." His eyebrows raised. "Let me guess. Mia's there?" "Of course," I said, laughing bitterly. "They're treating it like some big celebration for her." He shook his head, muttering something under his breath. Classic Linda. She's always had a way of picking favorites. After a while, Jack changed the subject, asking me about my plans for college. He seemed genuinely interested, which was kind of a shock. I wasn't used to people caring about what I had to say. We talked for hours, and by the time I left, I felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally let go of something I didn't even realize I was holding on to. A couple of days later, Jack called me. "Hey, Natalie, you free this afternoon?" "Yeah, why?" "I've got something to show you. Come by the house when you can." I wasn't sure what he meant, But I didn't have much else going on, so I hopped in my car and drove over. When I got there, Jack was waiting outside, leaning against an old pickup truck. "Come on," he said, motioning for me to follow him around the side of the house. We walked to the driveway and there it was, a brand new BMW 3 Series, shiny and sleek like it just rolled off the lot. I froze mid-step, my brain short-circuiting for a second. "Wait, what?" He smiled, holding up a set of keys. "It's yours." I stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "What? Number I can't—" "Sure you can," he said, cutting me off. "You earned it." He handed me the keys and I took them reluctantly, still trying to process what was happening. "Jack, I don't even know what to say." "Say you'll drive it to Columbia and make me proud," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. I couldn't help but laugh. "Seriously, though, why are you doing this?" Jack's expression softened. "Because you deserve it, and because someone needs to show you that you're worth celebrating." I tried to fight back tears. Nobody had ever done something like this for me. It wasn't just about the car, it was about what it represented. For the first time, someone had seen me, really seen me, and decided I was worth something. I drove home in my new car, still half convinced I was dreaming. When I pulled into the driveway, I parked next to my parents' empty spot, knowing they wouldn't be back for a few more days. It felt weird, almost like I was stepping into a version of my life that didn't belong to me. Over the next couple of days, I couldn't stop staring at the car. It was like this constant reminder that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as invisible as I thought. I started to feel a tiny spark of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. But of course, it didn't take long for reality to come crashing back. The morning my parents and Mia came back from Hawaii, I was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a book. I'd parked the car in the driveway on purpose, wanting to see how they'd react. When they pulled in, I watched through the window as Mom spotted it first. She fours, her hand halfway to the car door. Dad noticed it a second later, and then Mia. They all stood there, staring at the car like it had just landed from another planet. "What the hell is this?" Mom said, her voice carrying through the open window. I waited a beat before getting up and heading outside. "Oh, hey," I said casually. "You're back." Mom pointed at the car, her face red. "Whose is that?" "Mine," I said, twirling the keys around my finger. Mia let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Yeah, right. Like you could afford that." "Uncle Jack gave it to me," I said, enjoying the way their faces changed as the words sunk in. "Jack?" Mom said, her voice sharp. "You went to Jack? Why not?" I shot back. It's not like I had anyone else to turn to. For a second, nobody said anything. Then Mom's face twisted. "Well, you need to give it to Mia," she said finally. I blinked. "What? She needs a car for college," Mom said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "And you don't need something that fancy. You're just going to school. Mia's going to—" "Oh, hell no," I said, cutting her off. Mom's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" I said, "No, can you hear me?" I repeated. "This is my car, and I'm not giving it to anyone." Mia stepped forward, her hand outstretched. "Come on, Nat. Don't be selfish. You know I'll look better driving it anyway." I laughed, shaking my head. "Unbelievable. You guys just got back from a week in Hawaii that I wasn't invited to, and now you want my car? Not happening." Dad's face turned red. "If you don't hand over those keys, you can find somewhere else to live." "Funny you should say that," I said, walking to the car. I opened the trunk, revealing my packed suitcases and boxes. I was planning on leaving anyway. The look on their faces was priceless. Mom's mouth opened and closed like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Mia just stared, her arms crossed, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. I got into the car, started the engine, and rolled down the window. "Don't worry," I said. "I'll send you pictures. You know, so you can live vicariously through me." Then I drove off, leaving them standing there in the driveway. Driving away from my parents' house felt like ripping off a bandage. It stung, but at the same time, there was this weird sense of relief. For years, I'd been stuck in their shadow, always trying to be enough, and for once, I was leaving it all behind, on my terms. I drove straight to Uncle Jack's place. When I pulled up, he was sitting on the porch. He grinned when he saw me. "Figured you'd be back sooner or later," he said, standing up to help me with my bags. I told him everything that had happened, from the car confrontation to Dad's ultimatum. Jack listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When I finished, he shook his head and said, "Sounds like you made the right call." He set me up in his spare room, which wasn't much, but it was cozy. Over the next few days, I started settling into this new version of my life. I still had some savings from a part-time job I'd worked during high school, so I wasn't completely broke, and Jack offered to help out with anything I needed. Meanwhile, I made a point to block my parents and Mia on my phone and social media. I wasn't about to let them drag me back into their drama. But of course, that didn't stop them from trying. A few days later, I was in the kitchen helping Jack with dinner when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, and before I could even say hello, Mom's voice came through the line. "Natalie, where are you?" she demanded. I regret picking up. "I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry about me." "Don't worry, you just left," she snapped. "Do you have any idea how selfish that was? Your father and I have been worried sick." "Worried?" I said with sarcasm. "You didn't seem too worried when you were in Hawaii." "That's not the point," she said quickly. "You can't just run off and expect us to—" "To what?" I interrupted. "To care? Let's not pretend this is about me, Mom. You just don't like that I'm not playing along anymore." She stayed silent for a while, then sighed. "You're being dramatic. Come home, and we can talk about this like adults." "No thanks," I said. "I'm good where I am." Before she could argue, I hung up and blocked the number. After that, things were quiet for a while. I spent my days getting ready for college, organizing my paperwork, buying supplies, and figuring out logistics. Jack was a huge help, driving me around to pick up things I needed and giving me advice about living on my own. But the calm didn't last long. One afternoon, about a week after I'd moved in, Jack and I were sitting on the porch when a car pulled up in front of the house. I thought it was one of his neighbors, but then I saw who got out: Mom and Mia. "Oh, this should be good," Jack muttered, crossing his arms. Mom marched up the walkway like she was on a mission. Mia followed behind her, looking less confident, but still wearing that smug expression she always got when she thought she was about to win. "Natalie," Mom said as she reached the porch. "Come over here, we need to talk." Ignoring Jake, I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's nothing to talk about." There's plenty to talk about," she said, her tone sharp. "This behavior is unacceptable. You can't just run off and ignore your family." "I'm not ignoring you," I said. "I'm setting boundaries." "Boundaries?" Mia scoffed. "What are you, a therapist now?" Jack chuckled, clearly enjoying the show. Mom shot him a glare before turning back to me. "Natalie, enough of this nonsense. You need to come home and return that car right now. It's not fair to Mia." There it was, the real reason they were here. "This isn't about me coming home," I said. "You just want the car." "That car was a mistake," Mom said, her voice rising. "Jack had no right to give it to you." Jack finally stood up, stepping between us. "Actually, I had every right," he said calmly. "It's my money, and I'll spend it however I damn well please." Mia rolled her eyes. "It's ridiculous. You don't even need a car like that, Natalie. You're not going anywhere important." I laughed. "You mean like Columbia University?" "That's where I'm going." The color drained from Mia's face. Mom was shocked. "Columbia?" "Yeah," I said, holding her gaze. "I got in. Full acceptance. But I'm guessing you didn't notice since you were too busy planning your trip." For a moment, nobody said anything. Then Mia muttered, "Whatever. State's better anyway." "Sure it is," I said, smirking. My mom didn't back up. "Natalie, I'm serious. If you don't come home and return that car, you're going to regret it." "No, I won't," I said firmly. "I'm done. Done with the guilt trips, done being the invisible one, done with all of it. You've made it clear where I stand, and I'm not playing along anymore." Jack put a hand on my shoulder. "I think it's time for you two to leave," he said, his voice calm but firm. Mom opened her mouth to argue, but Jack cut her off. "Now." Mia looked like she wanted to say something, but Mom grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the car. As they drove away, I felt this weird mix of emotions, but mostly I felt free. Jake looked at me and said, "There's a reason your mom acts the way she does, but some things are better left in the past." I didn't comment on that. I knew he would tell me in the right time. And yeah, this is how things turned out. Do you think I overreacted to their trip? I guess I had the right to stand for myself after all these years. But also, I'm damn sure my mom won't let this slide, especially with Jake in the picture. I'll keep you guys updated. Something pops up. Stay tuned. Final update. Hey folks, it's me again. Thanks for all your comments and support. It really meant a lot while I was sorting through everything with my family. I wanted to share one last update because just like I anticipated, my mom didn't stay silent. So, here it goes. After Mom and Mia stormed out of Jack's house that day, something shifted. It was like I could finally breathe. I wasn't bracing for their next argument or trying to prove anything to them anymore. They didn't get what they wanted, and I was done trying to please them. The next few weeks flew by as I got ready to move to Columbia. Jack was amazing, helping me navigate everything. Between buying supplies, sorting through old stuff, and figuring out how to fit my life into a few boxes. It was chaos, but in the best way. One day, Jack announced we were going to a furniture store. "You need a good desk," he said, dragging me along. "I don't need anything fancy," I protested. "Nonsense. You're going to an Ivy League school. You need a desk that says, 'I'm smarter than you.'" I couldn't stop laughing. Jack has this way of turning even the simplest things into an adventure. We spent an hour debating desk styles until I gave in and chose one he liked. See? He said with a grin. You've got taste after all. With every little step, setting up my new laptop, choosing bedding, planning my schedule, it felt like I was leaving the past behind for good. I stayed distant from my parents and Mia. They didn't call and I didn't miss the drama. Jack, on the other hand, couldn't resist poking the bear. You know, he said one night over dinner, your mom called me. I froze. What did she want? She was fishing for details. How much I spent on the car, what your plans were, all that nonsense. And I told her to mind her own business and hung up. I couldn't stop laughing. You're the best. He said, you know, Natalie, this is the best thing that's ever happened to you, getting out of that house. You're finally free to figure out who you are without their nonsense holding you down. And he was right. Moving day came faster than I expected. Jack and I packed up the car with everything I owned, which wasn't much. As we pulled out of the driveway, I felt this weird mix of excitement and nerves. Columbia's campus was everything I'd imagined. Massive stone buildings, sprawling greens, and this electric energy. Jack helped me carry my stuff to my dorm, cracking jokes about how fancy it was compared to his old college apartment. For the first few weeks, everything felt like a dream. But of course, my mom and Mia weren't going to let me go that easily. The first sign of trouble came one afternoon when I was heading back to my dorm. I noticed Mia had tagged me in a post on social media. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a picture of my old room back home, completely empty, with the caption, out with the old, in with the new. Some people can't handle the truth. Actually, the post stung more than I wanted to admit. Mia wasn't just trying to get under my skin. She was painting me as the villain to anyone who'd listen. A few of our mutual friends from high school commented things like, OMG, what happened? And, sounds like Natalie's being dramatic again. It didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I started getting texts from people I hadn't talked to in months, asking why I was causing drama with my family. Mia had clearly been spreading her version of the story, and I was the bad guy in all of it. Then, just as I was starting to move past it, Mom showed up. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was in the library working on an assignment when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Come outside. We need to talk. I didn't need to guess who it was. Sure enough, when I stepped outside, there she was. Linda, in all her overbearing glory, standing by her car with a look that could curdle milk. Mom, I said, crossing my arms. What are you doing here? Don't use that tone with me, she snapped. We need to talk about this ridiculous stunt you've pulled. What stunt? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Running away from home, turning your back on your family, dragging Jack into your nonsense. Jack didn't drag me into anything. I cut her off. He actually supports me, which is more than I can say for you. She took a step closer, lowering her voice like she didn't want anyone to overhear. Natalie, this has gone on long enough. You need to come home and fix this. People are talking. Good, I said, shrugging. Let them talk. Maybe they'll finally see what's really going on. Her face twisted in anger. But before she could say anything else, I added, by the way, Mia's little smear campaign, it's not working. I don't care what she tells people, and neither should you. Mom's eyes narrowed. You've changed, Natalie, and not for the better. No, Mom, I said, standing my ground. I've just stopped pretending to be okay with your games. She stood there for a moment, clearly searching for something to say. But when nothing came, she got in her car and drove off without another word. After 2 days, Jack called me with some unexpected news. Your mom showed up at my house, he said, clearly amused. Why? She wanted to talk about the will, he said, laughing. I think she's worried I'm leaving everything to you. Typical Linda, always thinking about what's in it for her. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her not to worry about it. But honestly, Natalie, her showing up here isn't about the money. It's about control. She's afraid of what I might tell you. Your mom has spent her whole life hiding things, and she knows I don't play by her rules. My stomach churned. Hiding what? Jack hesitated for a moment, then sighed. Let's not open that can of worms right now. Focus on school, Natalie. You've got bigger things to worry about. His words hung in the air. I didn't push him, but I couldn't stop wondering what he wasn't telling me. Anyways, I am settling into my new life. My classes are amazing. My dorm feels like home. And for the first time, I'm not living in Mia's shadow or trying to earn my parents' approval. It's just me, myself, and I. And for the first time, this is enough. Thank you all for reading and sharing your thoughts. It means a lot. Your advice has been super helpful. If you've been in a similar situation, stand your ground and speak up for what you deserve. And hey, if you can't handle it all on your own, trust me, karma has a way of taking care of things.
You're fired, said my younger boss, Director Smith. Ever since he became the director, he's been harassing me. And now, he's finally told me I'm fired.
Understood.
I replied calmly, and as I was leaving the company, suddenly a number of luxury cars appeared. Then, one of the car windows rolled down, and the person inside was. My name is Sam Williams, a 50-year-old office worker. Though my name might sound like I belong in a black costume in a period drama, I'm just an average middle-aged office worker. But according to my grandpa, our ancestors once served as ninjas under the shogunate. As a family tradition, I was raised by my grandpa in the countryside, separated from my parents from a young age. While attending school, I received training on how to be a descendant of the Williams family from my grandpa. Our family's teachings emphasized living a modest life, respecting others, and mastering how to interact with people. Furthermore, I was taken to the mountains for what seemed like training. But it was nothing like throwing shurikens or using mysterious techniques as seen on TV or in movies. In today's world, such combat skills are unnecessary. I ran through the mountains to strengthen my body and endured waterfall training to fortify my mind. It was more akin to the ascetic practices of monks rather than military training. That I was training was, of course, a secret, and as a child, I couldn't play with friends after school or on holidays. At the time, it felt tough, but now I am grateful to my grandpa, because it made me stronger as a person. Being raised in such a special environment taught me that human qualities are more important than just being smart. Human qualities start with having pride in oneself as a person. Then, building good relationships with those around you and engaging with society with a healthy mindset.
Your ancestors lived their lives risking everything for the world. You should inherit that spirit and work for society.
These were the last words my grandpa said to me before he passed away. After my grandpa's death, I returned to my parents' home before starting college, where I first learned what I needed to do.
You should study at the university and then join Tokugawa Holdings.
That's the path for the Williams family. But you're not getting any special treatment. Like everyone else, you'll graduate, go through the interview process, and join the company fair and square. Tokugawa Holdings is one of the leading corporations in Japan. Especially if one hopes to work at the headquarters, I hear that nothing but exceptional abilities will do. Getting a job isn't as easy as just being told to join. But I was equipped with a sense of duty ingrained by my grandpa, and I could sincerely accept that path. True to my grandpa's words, to live my life for the sake of this world. I studied hard with a spirit forged through discipline and got into a prestigious university. After graduating, I interviewed like everyone else and successfully joined Tokugawa Holdings. It might seem a bit grandiose to say a salaried worker like me is dedicating his life to the world. But over the 25 years I've worked at this large company, I've devoted myself wholeheartedly to it. Though my days were consumed by work, I persevered, keeping my late grandpa's words close to my heart. Always reminded to value relationships, I made sure not to clash with others and kept a spirit of harmony. Thanks to that, I've earned trust from everyone at the office, and even as a regular employee, the president has approached me.
Mr. Williams, how about this coming weekend?
The president asked while practicing his golf swing.
Of course, I'd be honored to join you.
I replied, while I may not be able to dedicate my life for the world as my ancestors did, I am certainly dedicating it to this company. However, recently, I've started to feel that such loyalty might be seen as outdated in today's world. This realization was sparked by these words thrown at me out of the blue.
I don't think for a second that just because someone has been at the company a long time means they're respectable.
Rather, if they haven't advanced and have stayed for decades, they're just leeching off the company. Incompetent old-timers will be mercilessly cut, so be prepared. During a welcome party at the office, I was suddenly called out and told this. Even though alcohol was involved, I was shocked by his words. His name is Tyler Smith, a young elite, just 27 years old, who became the director last month. After studying business at a prestigious American university, he joined this company. He was quickly given a managerial position because he's the president's nephew. And it seems the president plans to entrust the future of the company to him over his own son, due to his superior performance.
I have been ready to dedicate myself to the company since I joined, I said.
Then why are you still just a regular employee? It must be because you lack ambition.
He said, his face turning red with anger. I looked at Director Smith calmly, aiming to respond with dignity rather than intimidation or flattery.
My lack of promotion is because that's the role I have. I have never once thought of leeching off the company, I responded.
So, an incompetent role.
Director Smith asked, frowning. But I couldn't respond any further. I didn't think it was appropriate to say it at such an occasion. I had been targeted by Director Smith for downsizing. And since he had written me off, he started to harass me whenever he could. Initially, he would just create menial tasks for me. But as I started handling them with ease, he finally took actions that impacted my actual work.
Sorry, Williams is currently away from his desk. I will take the call instead.
That's what happened when I received calls from clients, and they wouldn't connect them to me.
Director Smith, was that call just now from the president of IGA Products? Wasn't he looking for me?
It wasn't anything important. Besides, I will handle it from now on. You stick to the menial tasks.
The harassment of not letting me meet with client representatives continued several times, forcing me to step back. It was an utterly unreasonable way to behave, and it was troubling our clients too. Yet, it seemed Director Smith wanted to drive me out no matter what. In life, it's inevitable to be disliked by certain people. Not making enemies is fundamental in human relationships. But trying to be liked by everyone is not advisable, my grandpa used to say. When it's time to be disliked, one must accept it and just be disliked. However, I won't be able to continue with my work in this case. I decided it was time to confront Director Smith and have a proper discussion, so I stood up. If I'm outdated and don't fit his younger perspective, it's not just my problem alone. In fact, there have been rumors that Director Smith takes away work from employees he deems incompetent and pressures them. As their representative, I need to stand up to this.
Director Smith, I understand you have your reasons, but what you are doing is tyrannical.
If you have complaints about us, please first tell us what exactly is wrong. There might be room for improvement, I said. Then he glared at me and said,
You wouldn't understand, old man.
I felt a strong animosity from his words.
I won't know unless you tell me. Please, let's have a conversation, I insisted.
Then, he laughed scornfully and said,
You're fired.
At that moment, I realized that further discussion was futile. He had no intention of having a conversation from the start.
Understood,
I said quietly, and bowed my head to Director Smith.
Well, on you understanding.
Director Smith said with a laugh, looking down at me.
I don't mind leaving, but please stop pressuring others.
Leading people isn't about behaving this way. I believe it's your duty to ensure everyone can work together and help each other. The smile then vanished from Director Smith's face.
What? You think you're better than me? You think you're the kind of person who can talk back to a superior?
No, I am not superior, but everyone has the right to express their opinion, I replied.
Then, I turned my back on Director Smith. Just then, the phone on my desk rang, and I heard his irritated voice answer it over my shoulder.
I'm sorry, but Williams is no longer with this company. I will handle it instead.
It seemed Director Smith already considered me fired. Although as just a director, he shouldn't be able to officially fire me. But I decided to leave the company there and then. I packed up my things from my desk and left the office. Then, a line of luxury cars appeared outside. Stunned by the sight, I watched as the lead car smoothly pulled up beside me.
Chairman, why are you here?
I blurted out as I saw his face through the window. It was our company's chairman driving the luxury car. Having stepped down from the CEO position 20 years ago, the now 80-year-old chairman, known for his incredible vitality, was enjoying his retirement. Especially passionate about cars, he owned several luxury vehicles and made daily driving a routine. I had been in the chairman's car a few times until recently, all of which were luxurious enough to buy a house.
Today's weather is nice, so I was touring with my grandchildren, he explained.
Looking over, I saw a line of luxury cars. The chairman has about 10 grandchildren, all of whom, I heard, run their own businesses. A lineage of excellence indeed.
Speaking of which, I just got a call from the president of IGA Products, saying you had left the company.
That can't be right, right? You are still in front of the company after all. The chairman chatted cheerfully. However, I answered with a puzzled look.
No, I was just fired.
What? The chairman exclaimed, surprised.
It's unimaginable that you would leave our company. After all, our families have an unbreakable bond.
But I was just told by Director Smith that I'm fired, I replied.
Director Smith? He asked.
Yes, the young man who recently became a director at our company. I heard he's the president's nephew, I explained.
Tyler, I thought he was still studying in America, but he's back already, so Tyler told you that you're fired.
I nodded solemnly. With a deep sigh, the chairman parked the car and got out.
Really, it seems like his parents never taught him manners. I'll go and sort this out,
he said, walking briskly, his vigor belying his age of 80. Watching him, I was reminded of my grandfather. I was shocked when I heard I'd be living with my grandfather, moving away from the city to the countryside. Which was daunting, and above all, my grandfather had a fearsome reputation. This was because all the stories my father told about him were filled with harrowing episodes.
I was once made to climb a cliff that could have been fatal if I fell.
With only a rope for safety, and I was left in the mountains to survive on my own. Being sent to live with someone who did such things to his own children, I was filled with anxiety from the start. I thought about taking the opportunity to run away. However, after living with my grandpa, I realized he wasn't just a scary person.
You possess endurance, a unique ability passed down through our ancestors,
he said, showing a lonely expression. I wanted to make him smile instead of my father. It seems I stayed through Grandpa's strict teachings and training not just out of a sense of duty, but for his smile. His usually stern face occasionally showed a kind expression, which I really liked. As the chairman and I approached the president's office, we could hear the president yelling from inside.
You fired Williams. What are you doing acting on your own? You shouldn't have the authority to do that.
Uncle, he has no ambition and is useless. Are you planning to keep him in the company just because other employees like him?
Director Smith's voice could also be heard. It seemed that my firing had either been discovered quickly or he had proudly reported it himself to the president. Either way, the president seemed furious with Director Smith. The chairman and I exchanged glances and then entered the president's office.
Sorry to intrude while you're busy, we said.
Saying this, the chairman opened the door, and I followed, saying, "Excuse me," as I appeared behind him. Upon seeing the chairman, the president stood up in surprise.
What? My father-in-law? No, Chairman, what brings you here?
As the president is a son-in-law who married into the Tokugawa family, He especially feels subordinate to the chairman.
Well, I heard from the president of IGA Products that Mr. Williams had left the company, and I was surprised.
When I came to the company, I just happened to meet Mr. Williams at the entrance. I thought it was a misunderstanding, but I'm shocked to learn he really was fired. What's going on here? The president turned pale upon the chairman's questioning.
Well, that's because
Director Smith interjected.
Mr. Williams was incompetent, so I fired him.
How could someone remain a regular employee until 50? What has he been doing all this time? And why is this old man showing up with the chairman? Director Smith looked at me, puzzled.
Stop it, Tyler, you don't understand anything.
The president exclaimed, his face pale.
Is that so? You haven't explained the situation, have you, Tyler? Mr. Williams is far from incompetent.
In fact, it's because of his efforts behind the scenes that this company has survived.
Behind the scenes, what do you mean?
Director Smith cocked his head, puzzled, as he listened to the chairman's words.
This might come out of the blue, but actually, Mr. Williams's family are descendants of ninjas.
And since the White period, they have served the Tokugawa family, the chairman said.
A descendant of ninjas. What are you talking about? This isn't some kind of fantasy.
Clearly unable to hide his surprise, Director Smith stared intently at me. Indeed, being suddenly told about ninja ancestry is hard to grasp.
Normally, this would have been disclosed officially once he was named a successor of the company.
But now that this has happened, we had no choice. I never imagined you would fire Mr. Williams on your own, the chairman said with a wry smile as he looked at the president.
Even if he really is a descendant of ninjas, this man is incompetent.
He doesn't bring in more contracts than anyone else, nor does he try to compete. How does that contribute to the company's profits? We are paying him a salary, after all. Director Smith said, frowning and pointing at me.
Stop it, Tyler, that's no way to behave.
The president interjected, trying to admonish Director Smith in his panic. But it was the chairman who raised his voice sternly.
First, apologize for saying that you fired Mr. Williams on your own.
It was like a sharp sword had been swung down, an impact that even made me, who had been trained by my grandfather, straighten up instantly. Director Smith was taken aback by the force of the chairman's command, freezing momentarily.
Mr. Williams, I'm sorry.
He apologized as instructed. Seeing his fraught expression made me think he might be more honest than I had assumed. Perhaps he too wanted to improve the company by removing me and other regular employees, cutting what he saw as unnecessary personnel costs to increase profits is likely a fundamental principle. He learned it in his business studies.
Director Smith, I've said I am dedicated to the company.
That is true. I have never held back my abilities. It's just that much of my work was behind the scenes, making it hard to demonstrate clearly. I explained.
What do you mean by behind-the-scenes work? He asked.
That involves protecting the company from corporate spies who infiltrate it.
Tokugawa Holdings, being a major corporation directly linked to Japan's economy, naturally attracts foreign corporate spies. My true job was to identify and expel these spies, I revealed. Indeed, that's why I never made any enemies within the company. To be trusted by everyone and perceived as harmless, I had to perform my official duties just enough not to stand out. While this might make me appear incompetent to Director Smith, being perceived as such is also an important skill.
Taking Mr. Williams golfing each time is also part of a strategy.
He has a knack for gathering information from casual conversations. As a business strategy, it's crucial to probe for information from the other side. The president added while looking at me. Especially at golf tournaments where presidents from various companies gather, a lot of information gets exchanged.
I sent you to an American university because you were more talented than my own son, but that was just a part of it.
Running a company isn't as simple as that. I wanted you to learn this by working with Mr. Williams, but I never expected you to dislike him this much," the chairman said, causing the president to hang his head.
Tyler was an only child and was quite spoiled.
However, that also meant he had the freedom to learn in an unbounded environment. "Now, it's your job to guide him properly," the chairman told the president. I approached Director Smith, who seemed unable to accept this unexpected turn of events.
Director Smith, I hope to support you until the day you might take over as president.
You can assign me menial tasks as before, but I hope you think of me as a teammate. You can rely on me as a dependable ally. Then, with a solemn look, Director Smith said,
I apologize for the harsh words I said without understanding anything. I look forward to working with you.
I felt like I could see a new light in his eyes. From then on, Director Smith stopped exerting pressure on other employees. He was not naturally affable, but he was serious. I hope that he will gradually build better relationships within the company. I am grateful to be able to work with such people now and in the future. Now, I finally understand the last words my grandfather said.
As a modern-day ninja, I dedicate my life to the people and society I care about.
With those words in mind, I continue to work diligently as a regular employee every day. 10 years have passed, and the news that Tyler Smith has become the youngest president in the history of Tokugawa Holdings stirred up the public. There was some debate within the company that it might be too soon, but I felt that it wasn't.
Mr. Williams, I look forward to working with you.
He said to me, bowing his head on the day of the presidential inauguration ceremony. Seeing him do that, the phrase "the heavier the ear of rice, the deeper it bows" came to mind.
I will follow you until the end of my days.
I responded, bowing to the same level as him, feeling the joy of connecting eras.
This story is titled, "My Family Sided with My Stepbrother When He Got My Girlfriend Pregnant. But 2 years later, we discovered neither of us was the father, and now he is losing his mind." Hey guys, so I guess I need to lay this out somewhere because it's been eating at me for a long time. I'm Eric, 28 male, and about 2 years ago, my life did a complete 180. Looking back, I don't know how I missed the signs, but hindsight's 20/20, right? Let's rewind a bit. For a while, I thought my life was pretty smooth sailing. I had a stable job, a decent apartment, and even found someone I thought could be the one. But now, I wish I'd seen the red flags sooner. It's crazy how you can think you've got things figured out, only to realize you've been walking into a mess without even noticing. Here's some context. A couple of years ago, I met Haley, 26, at this diner downtown. She wasn't just your average server. Haley was quick with a smile, sharp with her jokes, and she had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. I'd go there after work to grab lunch, and we'd chat about everything from indie movies to music to how much we both hated the morning rush. One day, after a particularly long shift at work, I decided to ask her out. Nothing flashy, just a simple, "Hey, you want to grab dinner sometime?" To my surprise, she said yes. A few weeks later, we were inseparable. We'd spend our weekends watching old cult classics, going for walks by the river, and talking about how we both wanted to escape our small-town routines someday. Haley had dreams of opening her own little cafe, and I was just trying to climb the corporate ladder in finance. 6 months in, we decided to move in together. It felt natural, you know? She brought her books, her plants, and her knack for making my apartment actually feel like a home. I was happy, like genuinely happy. Haley was supportive, fun, and just had this way of making the hard days seem easier. Things were so good that I decided it was time for her to meet my family. That's where the cracks started to show. Let me give you a quick breakdown of my family dynamics because it's complicated. My dad, Patrick, remarried when I was 16. My mom had passed away when I was 14. And for a couple of years, it was just me and my dad trying to figure things out. Then came Barbara, my stepmom. She brought along Ryan, my stepbrother, who was a year younger than me. Now Ryan and I never clicked. He wasn't a bad guy on the surface. He was just one of those people who seemed to get away with everything. He'd bounce from job to job, dropping out of community college after one semester, claiming school wasn't for him. Barbara always defended him, saying he was just figuring himself out. Meanwhile, I was busting my butt to get through college, working part-time jobs, and making something of myself. It wasn't just Ryan, though. Barbara had a habit of playing favorites, and let's just say I wasn't her favorite. If Ryan managed to scrape by, it was a cause for celebration. If I got a promotion at work, barely a nod. My dad? He was a good guy. But honestly, he leaned on Barbara too much. He'd go along with whatever she said, probably to keep the peace. Anyway, I thought bringing Haley into the mix would be a chance to show my family how happy I was. And to my surprise, things started out well. Barbara was unusually nice, going on about how much she loved Haley's style and even asking her for tips on cooking. My dad seemed happy for me, and Ryan, I don't know. That's where things got weird. Ryan was unusually chatty that night. He kept asking Haley about her work, her hobbies, her favorite movies. He laughed a little too hard at her jokes. Jokes that weren't even that funny, if I'm being honest. At one point, he even offered to show her his comic book collection in the basement, which was something I didn't even know he still had. At the time, I brushed it off as Ryan just being friendly. Haley didn't seem bothered, and I wasn't about to ruin the night by overthinking it. After all, it was just one dinner. But then, over the next few weeks, I started noticing little things. Ryan suddenly became a regular at the diner where Haley worked. He claimed it was because he liked their food. But let's be real. Ryan wasn't the type to go out of his way for anything unless there was something in it for him. I asked Haley about it, and she shrugged it off. He's just being nice, she said. Maybe he's lonely or something. That sounded plausible, I guess. Ryan wasn't exactly swimming in friends. Still, something about it rubbed me the wrong way. I casually mentioned that weird vibe they have to my dad one day during a phone call. I wasn't trying to stir the pot, just venting a little. His response was classic dad. Oh, I'm sure it's nothing, Eric. Ryan's just trying to be helpful. You should be glad they're getting along. That didn't help at all. Things escalated when Ryan started offering Haley rides home. It started on days when I was stuck at work late, and she didn't want to take the bus. It's just a ride, she'd say. You don't need to worry. And because I trusted her and wanted to avoid being the jealous boyfriend, I let it go. Looking back, I feel like an idiot for ignoring the signs. But at the time, I didn't want to believe my stepbrother could be crossing any lines. I mean, Ryan and I weren't close, but we were family. Surely he wouldn't, right? Fast forward a few months and everything felt like it was falling into place. Haley and I were talking about the future, moving to a bigger apartment, maybe even taking a vacation together. Life was good. Then came the day I stumbled across a pregnancy test in the bathroom. It was tucked behind a stack of towels, almost like it wasn't meant to be found. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it wasn't Haley's. Maybe a friend left it there, or it was some kind of mistake. But the doubt didn't last long. I brought it up to her later that day, not really sure what to expect. When I asked about it, she paused, then admitted it was hers. She said she'd been scared to tell me because she wasn't sure how I'd react. Hearing that hit me in a strange way. On one hand, I couldn't believe she hadn't told me sooner. On the other, I felt this wave of excitement I didn't expect. My head was spinning, but in a good way. I started thinking about the future, not just with Haley, but as a dad. It wasn't something I had planned for right then, but the idea of having a family, of creating something bigger than us, felt right. I couldn't stop picturing it. A baby in the house, family holidays, teaching them how to ride a bike or showing them my favorite old movies. It was like this switch flipped in me, and suddenly I wanted it all. That night, I made a decision. If this was happening, I wasn't going to drag my feet. I wanted to show Haley that I was all in, not just for the baby, but for us. So I left work early the other day, feeling more determined than I'd ever been. I went straight to a jewelry store, spent way too much time picking out the perfect ring, and didn't even care about the cost. I knew what I wanted. To take the next step with Haley and make this official. For the first time in a long while, I felt like everything in my life was falling into place. On my way home, Ryan called me out of nowhere. No, hey, what's up? Just straight to the point. We need to talk. Can you come over? It's important. I wanted to say no. I mean, I had stuff to do, and honestly, Ryan isn't usually the dramatic type, so part of me thought it couldn't be that serious. Still, something about the way he said it made me pause. It wasn't like him to call me like this, and definitely not to sound so intense. I debated for a bit, pacing around like an idiot. I had plans for the night, plans I wasn't ready to ditch, but I couldn't shake this weird feeling in my gut. So I figured I'd just go, hear him out, and then head out. The second I walked into his place, I knew something was off. I don't know why, but the vibe just felt heavy, like whatever he had to say wasn't going to be good. Before I even had a chance to sit down or ask what was up, he dropped it on me. And let me tell you, it was like someone had yanked the rug right out from under me. Everything I thought I knew, gone in an instant. When I entered his apartment, I got so confused I saw Haley sitting on his couch sobbing. Her makeup messed up and she looked miserable. I had no idea what she's doing there. Then Ryan looked at me and said exactly, Haley and I have been seeing each other. For months, my mind didn't even register it at first. Like it couldn't compute the betrayal. I just stood there, frozen, staring at both of them. Haley was still crying, tears streaming down her face, but she couldn't even look at me. Ryan, the guy who couldn't keep a job for more than a few weeks, who had always been a leech on my family, had the nerve to stand there looking guilty, like he was the victim here. I wanted to laugh, scream, or maybe just throw something, but all I could manage was, "Are you serious right now? How long has this been going on?" Ryan stared at the floor, shifting like a guilty kid caught stealing candy. "A few months," he said, barely audible. "It just happened. Just happened? What does that even mean? People trip and drop their phones. They don't just happen to sleep with their stepbrother's girlfriend." Before I could process that nonsense, Haley spoke up, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, Eric. I didn't mean for this to happen." Her words cut deeper than Ryan's. Yeah, she didn't mean for it to happen? Was that supposed to make it better? I felt my chest tighten, anger bubbling up. "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, my voice sharper now. "You didn't mean to cheat on me with my stepbrother? That just happened?" She didn't answer. Instead, she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. Meanwhile, Ryan, of all people, decided he had something to say. He stepped forward, trying to calm me down. "Look, Eric, I get that you're mad. You have every right to be. But," he hesitated, glancing at Haley, then back at me. "You need to know something else." I glared at him, already bracing for the worst. "What now, Ryan? What have you done too?" He hesitated again, rubbing the back of his neck like he was stalling. Then he dropped the second bomb. "The baby. It might be mine." I swear it felt like the floor just disappeared beneath me. My head started spinning. The baby. The one I'd been so excited about. The one I thought was the start of a family with Haley. It might not even be mine. I'd been picturing this future with her, planning to propose that night, and now I was standing in Ryan's crappy apartment, hearing this nightmare unfold. I turned to Haley, desperately hoping she'd deny it. "Is this true?" I asked, my voice quieter now, almost begging for her to say it wasn't. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she said, her words barely audible through her sobs. "I was going to tell you, but I was scared." Scared. Of course she was scared. So scared that she let me believe everything was fine while sneaking around with Ryan. So scared that she let me think I was going to be a father when she didn't even know for sure whose baby it was. My fists clenched at my sides as I tried to stop the wave of emotions threatening to pull me under. Anger, betrayal, sadness, everything all at once. "You know what?" I said finally. "You two deserve each other. I'm done." I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. My mind was racing, but as the anger simmered down, I knew I needed to tell my parents. At the very least, they needed to know the truth about Ryan and what he had done. So I went straight to their house, hoping for some kind of support or, honestly, just someone to listen. When I told them everything, Haley's betrayal, Ryan's involvement, and the baby situation, I expected anger or maybe even disappointment in Ryan. But instead, Barbara was quick to jump to his defense. "Eric, these things happen. People make mistakes," she said, her tone so dismissive it made my blood boil. "Maybe you weren't giving Haley what she needed. You can't blame Ryan for that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you seriously blaming me for this? Ryan went behind my back with my girlfriend, and you're making excuses for him?" Barbara shook her head like I was overreacting. "They're happy now, Eric. Don't you think it's better this way? It's not like you and Haley were married." My dad, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke up. I thought maybe he'd be the voice of reason, but no. He just nodded and said, "It's probably for the best, son. You don't want to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't love you. Let them figure it out." The betrayal cut deeper than I thought it could. My own family, the people who were supposed to have my back, had chosen my stepbrother, again. They didn't care about what he had done, how he had disrespected me, or how much this entire situation had wrecked me. To them, keeping the peace was more important than standing up for what was right. I left their house without another word. By the time I got home, the anger started turning into clarity. There was nothing left for me here. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't care where. I just needed to get as far away from this disaster as possible. By morning, I had my plan. Leave, rebuild, and never look back. Whatever future I thought I had with Haley was gone. I crashed on my buddy Jake's couch for a week while I figured things out. Jake's the kind of guy who doesn't ask too many questions, which was exactly what I needed. I applied for a transfer at work the next day. Luckily, my company had offices in a few different cities, and after a lot of back and forth with HR, they approved a move to their branch 2 hours away. It wasn't super far, but it was far enough that I didn't have to worry about running into anyone I knew. The first few months were rough. I moved into a tiny studio apartment that felt more like a shoebox than a home. I kept to myself, spending most of my time at work or zoning out in front of the TV. I was still untangling everything in my head: how Haley had betrayed me, how Ryan had crossed a line, and how my own family had taken his side without a second thought. I'll admit, I spent a lot of nights replaying everything in my head, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. Was it my fault for not seeing the signs sooner? Should I have been more confrontational when Ryan started acting shady? The self-blame was brutal, but eventually I realized that I couldn't change what happened. All I could do was move forward. That's when I decided to focus on myself. 2 years passed like this. Slowly but surely, I started to feel like myself again. I wasn't completely healed. There were still days when the memories would creep back in, but I was in a much better place. Then, out of nowhere, Haley showed up at my door. It was a Friday evening, and I'd just gotten home from work. I was looking forward to a quiet night of takeout and Netflix when there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I assumed it was a neighbor, or maybe someone delivering a package. When I opened the door and saw Haley standing there, holding a baby, I almost slammed it shut out of reflex. She looked different, tired, worn down, like life had taken a few swings at her. The baby, who couldn't have been more than a year old, was sleeping in her arms, bundled up in a faded blue blanket. For a moment, we just stared at each other. I didn't know what to say. The last time I'd seen Haley, she was crying on Ryan's couch, confessing that the baby she was carrying wasn't mine. Finally, she broke the silence. "Can we talk?" Every instinct in my body screamed at me to say no, to slam the door and tell her to get lost. But then I looked at the baby, small, innocent, completely unaware of the mess surrounding them, and something in me softened. "Fine," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." "So," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "What do you want?" Haley hesitated, her eyes darting between me and the baby. I need your help, Eric," she said finally. I raised an eyebrow. "Help with what exactly?" She took a deep breath. "It's about the baby," she said. I think she's yours." I froze. Of all the things she could have said, that was the last thing I expected. I was completely thrown. I mean, how do you even process something like that? For 2 years, I'd been living my life, thinking I was done with her and the chaos she brought into my world. And now she was back, holding a baby and telling me I might be the father. I didn't say anything. I just sat there staring at her. I could tell she was nervous, but I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. Finally, I found my voice. "You said the baby was Ryan's. You were pretty damn sure about that, Haley. So why are you here now, telling me she's mine?" Haley looked down, avoiding my eyes. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. "I was scared, Eric. Everything was happening so fast, and Ryan convinced me. He convinced me that it had to be his. But now I'm not so sure." "Not so sure?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "You realize how insane that sounds, right?" She nodded. "I know. I messed up. I should have done a paternity test back then, but I was too caught up in everything. I thought Ryan would step up and take care of us, but he didn't." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. On one hand, I couldn't fight the urge of kicking her out and tell her to deal with her own mess. But there was a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispering, "What if she's telling the truth?" After a long pause, I said, "So what do you want from me, Haley? Why are you here now?" "I want to do a paternity test," she said. "If she's not yours, I'll leave you alone. But if she is, you deserve to know." I couldn't argue with that. If there was even a slight chance that the baby was mine, I needed to know. Not for Haley's sake, but for the baby's. "Fine," I said finally. "We'll do the test. But until then, I don't want any drama. Got it?" The relief washed over her face. "Thank you, Eric. I mean it." The next day, I made some calls and set up an appointment for a paternity. The lab said it would take about a week to get the results. In the meantime, I started digging into Haley's story. Something about it still didn't add up, and I wasn't about to take her word for anything. I reached out to my college buddy, Greg, who now worked as a private investigator. Greg was one of those guys who could find out anything about anyone, and I figured if anyone could help me get to the bottom of this, it was him. When I explained the situation, Greg didn't even blink. "Send me everything you've got. Timelines, names, anything you think might be relevant," he said. "I'll look into it and see what I can find." Over the next few days, I tried to go about my life as usual, but it wasn't easy. Every time I looked at the clock, I found myself wondering what Greg might be uncovering, or what the paternity test results would say. Haley stayed in a motel while we waited, which was honestly a relief. I didn't need her hovering around, adding to my stress. A few days later, Greg called with an update. Eric, he said, his tone serious, you're not going to believe this. He went on to tell me that during the time Haley and I were together, she'd been seeing someone else, a guy named Josh, who worked as a line cook at the same diner. Greg had found old social media posts and messages between them that dated back to when Haley and I were still a couple. Wait, I said, cutting him off. You're telling me she was seeing this guy and Ryan at the same time? Looks like it, Greg replied. And here's the thing. Based on the timeline, it's possible Josh is the baby's father, not you or Ryan. My head was spinning. Haley had managed to drag 3 different guys into this mess, and now she was knocking on my door, expecting me to clean it up? Greg didn't stop there. He'd also dug into Haley's past and found a pattern. Before she moved to our town, she'd lived in another city where she'd pulled a similar stunt, juggling multiple relationships and leaving a trail of burned bridges behind her. Eric, this woman's a pro, Greg said. She knows how to play people, and she's been doing it for years. When I hung up the phone, I lost my shit. I was so angry, not just at Haley, but at myself for ever getting involved with her in the first place. A few days later, the paternity test results came in. As I opened the envelope, my heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was hoping for, to be the father or not. Either way, my life was about to change. The results were clear. I wasn't the father. For a moment, I just stared at the paper, feeling a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief that I wasn't tied to Haley for the rest of my life, and anger that she'd dragged me into this mess to begin with. With all the dirt Greg dug up, I knew it wasn't enough to just block Haley and move on. She needed to be confronted with the truth, not just for my peace of mind, but to make sure she knew her lies had caught up with her. I wasn't about to let her walk away thinking she could manipulate people like this without consequences. So I called her one last time and told her we should meet. She hesitated, probably sensing something was up. Okay, when? Tomorrow. Meet me at that diner you used to work at. The irony of meeting her at the place where it all started wasn't lost on me. The next morning, I got there early and grabbed a booth in the back corner, away from the crowd. I had a folder with me, every piece of evidence Greg had found, plus the paternity test results. I wasn't planning to go easy on her. Haley walked in a few minutes late, carrying the baby in her arms. She looked anxious, but tried to mask it with a weak smile. What's this about, Eric? She asked, trying to sound casual. I didn't waste any time. I got the paternity test results, I said, sliding the envelope across the table. Her smile faded. She didn't open the envelope, just stared at it like it might bite her. And the baby isn't mine, I said bluntly. Not mine. Not Ryan's either, from what Greg found out. Her eyes darted to mine, wide with panic. What do you mean Greg found out? Who's Greg? The one who discovered your dirty laundry. He is private investigator, I said, leaning back in my seat. He uncovered a lot about you, Haley, like the fact that you were seeing Josh, the line cook, while we were together, and how you've pulled this same stunt before in another city, dating multiple guys at the same time, playing them against each other. Sound familiar? Haley's face turned pale. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she tried to laugh it off. Eric, come on. You really hired a PI? That's ridiculous. Ridiculous? You know what's ridiculous? Showing up at my door after 2 years and trying to pin a kid on me that you knew wasn't mine? She got defensive. I didn't know for sure, okay? I thought maybe... Don't, I interrupted. Don't sit there and pretend this was some innocent mistake. You've been lying to everyone from the start. Josh is the father, isn't he? Haley looked away. I don't know, she mumbled. Cut the crap, Haley, I snapped, pulling out the folder. I opened it and laid out the evidence. Screenshots of her messages with Josh, photos of them together, and even a timeline of events Greg had pieced together. It's all right here. You were seeing him before, during, and after you were with me. He's the father. I thought she might cry, but instead, she just sighed and said, Fine. You're right. Josh is probably the father. Are you happy now? Happy, I repeated. You've got some nerve, Haley. You lied to me, to Ryan, to Josh, hell, probably to half the people in this town. And you think I should be happy about what, exactly? She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, adjusting the baby on her lap. Look, I didn't plan for things to get this messy, okay? I made mistakes, but I didn't know what else to do. Oh, you didn't know what else to do, I said, leaning forward. How about not lying to everyone around you? How about taking responsibility for your actions, instead of dragging people into your mess? Haley didn't respond. She just sat there, staring down at the table. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I've already sent all this evidence to my family. They know the truth now, and they're done with you. As for Josh, he deserves to know he has a kid. I'll make sure he gets this information. That seemed to snap her out of it. Wait, she said quickly. You can't tell Josh. He doesn't need to know. He's not ready to be a father. Not my problem, I said coldly. He has a right to know, and you've already stolen 2 years from him. I'm not helping you keep this lie going. Haley looked like she was about to protest, but then she stopped herself. Maybe she realized she didn't have a leg to stand on anymore. What do you want from me, Eric? She asked quietly. Nothing, I said. I don't want anything from you, Haley. I just want you to leave me alone. Don't call me. Don't show up at my door. Don't try to drag me back into your life. We're done. Now you can leave, I told her. It sounded like a demand. As she got up to leave, she looked at me one last time. I really am sorry, Eric, she said. For everything. I didn't respond. I just watched her walk away, the baby resting on her shoulder. When she was gone, I let out a long sigh and leaned back in the... It was over. Finally. Truly over. I'd confronted Haley, laid out the truth, and cut her out of my life for good. That night, I went home and thought about everything that had happened over the past couple of years. It wasn't just about Haley and the lies. This was also about my family. The way my dad and Barbara had treated me still stung. They didn't just fail to support me. They actively took Ryan's side and pushed me away. Even now, knowing the truth about Haley, I hadn't heard much more than a half-hearted apology from my dad. I wasn't ready to let them back in. Honestly, I didn't know if I ever would be. In the days following my confrontation with Haley, I made sure the evidence Greg had gathered got into the right hands. I contacted Josh, the baby's biological father. I wasn't trying to stir up drama, but he had a right to know the truth. When I called him, he sounded shocked. Wait, what? Haley has a kid? And you're saying she's mine? Yep, I said, almost laughing, but kept it short. I've got the DNA test results, and there's no doubt. She's been lying to everyone, including you. Josh took a long pause before saying, Thanks for telling me. I had no idea. I'll figure this out. I didn't know what he planned to do, but that wasn't my business anymore. I'd done my part. With Haley and her mess finally out of my life, I focused on getting back to normal, or at least figuring out what normal meant for me. One of the first things I did was reconnect with my friends. Over the past couple of years, I'd pulled away from a lot of people, mostly because I didn't want to explain the disaster my life had turned into. But now I realized how much I missed having those connections. Jake, the friend who let me crash on his couch when everything first went down, was the first person I called. We grabbed burgers at our favorite spot, and it felt like old times. We laughed, talked about work, and even planned a weekend trip to the mountains. It reminded me that not everything in my life had to be heavy and complicated. I also decided to double down on my career, and I started running on weekends. I joined a local running group, which not only helped me stay in shape, but also introduced me to new people. One of the group members, Sarah, stood out almost immediately. She was smart, funny, and had this no-nonsense attitude that I really appreciated. We started chatting during runs, and before I knew it, we were grabbing coffee after practice. It wasn't anything serious at first, just two people getting to know each other, but it felt good to have that spark again. As things with Sarah slowly progressed, I couldn't help but reflect on my relationship with Haley. At first, I was worried I'd carry that baggage into anything new, but Sarah wasn't Haley. She was honest and straightforward, and she didn't play games. It was refreshing. About 6 months after cutting ties with Haley, I got a surprise call from my dad. Hey, Eric, he said, sounding hesitant. I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. I'm fine. There was a long pause before he said, I know things haven't been great between us, and I wanted to apologize. I didn't handle things the way I should have back then. It wasn't exactly the heartfelt apology I'd hoped for, but it was something. I told him I appreciated the call, but didn't say much else. I wasn't ready to forgive him yet. Barbara and Ryan didn't reach out at all, which was fine by me. From what I'd heard through the grapevine, Ryan was still bouncing between jobs, and Barbara was still coddling him. Some things never change. As for Haley, she stayed true to her word and didn't contact me again. Occasionally, I'd hear bits and pieces about her through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, Josh had stepped up and was trying to be a part of his child's life, but their relationship was rocky at best. It wasn't my problem anymore, though. With each passing day, I felt more and more like myself. The anger and bitterness I'd carried for so long started to fade, replaced by a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. I was learning to trust myself again, to make decisions without second-guessing everything. By the time Sarah and I started officially dating, I realized I'd finally moved on. Haley's lies, my family's betrayal, Ryan's nonsense. It was all in the past. It didn't define me anymore. It's funny how life works out sometimes. What felt like the end of the world turned out to be the start of something better. Sarah wasn't just a fresh start. She was proof that I could let someone in again. She showed me what a real partner looks like. Someone who builds you up instead of tearing you down. And yeah, I guess that's it. To everyone who stuck around to read my story and shared your thoughts, thank you. Your support means more than you know. It's a reminder that even when people let you down, there's still good out there. Take care of yourselves, and don't settle for less than you deserve. This story is titled, My Mother-in-Law Called Me Cheap and Stingy, then threw the ring I bought for her daughter at my face. So I called off the engagement, and she is desperate to reconcile. Hi Reddit, before I start my disastrous story, let me give you some background first. I, 27 male, grew up in a middle-class household where financial stability wasn't just a goal, it was a necessity. My parents taught me the value of saving, and I carried that lesson into adulthood. I met Grace, 25 female, 2 years ago at a barbecue hosted by a mutual friend. I was there because my buddy Ethan wouldn't stop nagging me to get out of the house more. I wasn't expecting much, maybe a burger, a couple of awkward conversations, and heading home early. But then I saw Grace. She wasn't the loud, center of attention type. She was sitting at the edge of the yard, sketching something in a notebook. I walked over, asked what she was drawing, and we started talking. She had this calm energy that was so different from the usual look at me type of people I'd met before. One thing led to another, and by the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers. We clicked almost immediately. Grace was sweet, creative, and had this way of making the smallest things feel meaningful. She'd tell me about her favorite art projects, the way she wanted to open her own studio someday, and all these little dreams that made her eyes light up. I loved listening to her talk about it all. But early on, she brought up her mom. She's kind of intense, Grace said one night when we were grabbing dinner. How intense? I asked, kind of joking, but not really. Grace sighed. She just has really strong opinions about everything. My job, my friends, my clothes. She means well, though. She just wants me to do well. I didn't think much of it at the time. Everyone has family quirks, right? But when I met Linda, her mom, I realized this wasn't just some quirky mom who got a little too involved. This was a full-blown control freak. Linda was polite the first time we met, but it felt fake, like she was sizing me up. She asked about my job, I work in tech, where I went to school, and then immediately asked, "What's your long-term plan?" I'm planning to grow in my role and maybe start my own company one day, I said, trying to sound confident. She raised an eyebrow, gave Grace this look, and said, "Well, stability is important. Grace deserves someone who can provide." That rubbed me the wrong way, but I let it go. Grace seemed nervous, and I didn't want to make things awkward. As time went on, though, I started noticing how much control Linda had over Grace's life. Grace had always wanted to be an artist, but Linda had pushed her into accounting because art doesn't pay the bills. Grace hated her job, but anytime she talked about quitting or pursuing art, Linda would guilt her with, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you thank me." It wasn't just her career either. Linda had opinions about everything. Grace's clothes, the food she ate, even how she wore her hair. If Grace bought a dress Linda didn't approve of, she'd make comments like, "You really think that flatters you?" What bothered me the most was how Grace would just take it. She never stood up to her mom, always brushing it off like she's just old-fashioned or she doesn't mean it like that. At first, I tried to be supportive. I'd tell Grace she didn't need to let her mom control her, that she was smart and capable enough to make her own choices. Grace would nod and thank me, but nothing ever changed. The longer we dated, the more I started feeling like Linda wasn't just controlling Grace's life. She was starting to influence our relationship too. Linda had this way of making me feel like I wasn't good enough, even when she wasn't directly saying it. She'd make comments like, "It's nice that you're doing okay for yourself," or, "Tech is so unpredictable, isn't it?" Grace never said anything when her mom made these comments. She'd just give me this apologetic look like, "I know she's being a pain, but what can I do?" One time, we were at dinner with her parents, and Linda started talking about how men should always provide, and how she was lucky Grace's dad had real ambition. I could feel my face heating up, but Grace just sat there quietly, not saying a word. Later, I brought it up. "Why don't you ever say anything when your mom talks like that?" "She's just like that," Grace said. "It's not worth the argument." It frustrated me, but I didn't push too hard. I loved Grace, and I figured maybe this was just something we'd deal with over time. But looking back, I think that was the first crack in the foundation. The truth is, Linda's control over Grace wasn't just a problem for her. It was starting to become a problem for us. And the more I tried to ignore it, the harder it became to see a future where Linda wasn't pulling the strings. Still, I held on to the hope that things could get better. I thought maybe if I showed Linda how serious I was about Grace, she'd ease up. That hope is what led to the proposal, and ultimately, everything that came after. After 2 years of dating, I knew I wanted to marry Grace. Despite her mom's constant interference, I loved Grace for who she was: kind, patient, and creative. I'd spent months saving up for a ring. It wasn't some massive rock that you'd see in a movie, but it was perfect in my eyes. A platinum band with a beautiful diamond solitaire. It was elegant and timeless, something I knew Grace would appreciate. I planned to keep the proposal intimate. Grace had never been one for grand gestures, and I wanted the moment to feel personal and special. One Saturday afternoon, I took her to our favorite park by the river. It was a place we often went to just relax, and it had this spot with a bench overlooking the water. We were sitting there, talking about our plans for the weekend, when I decided to go for it. I pulled out the ring box and got down on one knee. "Grace," I said, feeling my heart race a little, "I love you, and I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Her face lit up. "Yes," she said, tears in her eyes. She hugged me so tightly I almost forgot to actually put the ring on her finger. For a few days, everything felt perfect. Grace kept looking at the ring and smiling, and I thought I'd nailed it. We talked about wedding plans, something simple, maybe outdoors, and I started to feel like we were on the same page. Then Grace suggested we visit her parents to share the news and get their blessing. I won't lie, I wasn't thrilled about the idea. Linda wasn't exactly my biggest fan, and I knew she'd have something to say about the ring, the wedding, or both. But Grace seemed so excited about the idea that I didn't want to ruin it for her. "We'll just tell them together," Grace said, squeezing my hand. "Mom will come around. She just needs to see how happy we are." I nodded, even though I wasn't convinced. When we arrived at her parents' house, Linda was sitting in the living room with her husband Mike. Now, Mike's a quiet guy. He mostly stays out of Linda's way, which I can't really blame him for. He gave us a polite nod when we walked in, while Linda's eyes immediately darted to Grace's hand. "What's this?" Linda asked, her tone sharp. Grace smiled, holding up her hand. "We're engaged." For a moment, Linda didn't say anything. She just stared at the ring like she was trying to figure out if it was a joke. Then she let out this small laugh. Not the happy kind, but the kind that makes you feel like you've done something wrong. "That's the ring?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes. Isn't it beautiful?" Grace said, still smiling. Linda didn't answer. Instead, she walked over, grabbed Grace's hand, and examined the ring like it was a piece of costume jewelry. "It's so small," she finally said. "Are you sure this is an engagement ring?" "Mom," Grace said, her smile fading. "Don't start." "Don't start?" Linda repeated, looking at me now. "Adam, you're telling me you couldn't get her something a little more substantial?" I felt my jaw clench. I'd expected some comments, but this felt like a straight-up attack. "I picked this ring because it's meaningful," I said, trying to stay calm. "It's elegant and within our budget. I didn't think the size of the diamond was what mattered." Linda let go of Grace's hand and crossed her arms. "An engagement ring is supposed to show how serious you are. This looks like you're cutting corners." "Mom!" Grace said, her voice sharper this time. But Linda wasn't done. "I'm just saying, Grace deserves better. If you can't afford a proper ring, how are you going to afford a wedding? Or a house? Or kids?" Mike, who'd been sitting quietly the whole time, finally spoke up. "Linda, maybe we should just congratulate them." Linda shot him a look that could freeze water. "Mike, I'm just being honest. This is our daughter's future we're talking about." I took a deep breath. I love Grace, and I want to build a life with her. I'm not going to blow all my savings on a ring when we have a future to plan for. Linda laughed again, that same condescending laugh. "That's a nice speech, Adam, but it sounds like an excuse." Before I could say anything else, she grabbed the ring off the coffee table where Grace had set it down. "If this is the best you can do," she said, tossing it back onto the table, "then maybe you're not ready for marriage." Grace's face went pale. "Mom, stop," she said, her voice breaking. But Linda ignored her. "Grace, you need to think about this. Marriage is a serious commitment. You can't just say yes to the first guy who comes along with a cheap ring." That was it for me. I stood up, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "I'm not going to sit here and be insulted. I love Grace, but I won't let you disrespect me like this." Linda didn't even flinch. "If you're serious about marrying my daughter, you'll prove it. Get her a real ring. Until then, don't waste our time." I turned to Grace, hoping she'd say something, anything to back me up, but she just stood there, looking torn. "Adam, let's just go," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. We left, the car ride back to my apartment completely silent. I wanted to talk about what had just happened, but I also didn't trust myself to say something I'd regret. When we got to my place, Grace finally spoke up. "I'm sorry about my mom. She's just protective." "Protective?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Grace, she called the ring cheap and threw it at me. That's not protective. That's cruel." "She doesn't mean it like that," Grace said, avoiding my eyes. "She just has high standards." "High standards?" I said, shaking my head. "Grace, she disrespected me in front of you, and you didn't say a word. How am I supposed to deal with that for the rest of my life? Grace didn't have an answer. She just sat there, looking like she wanted to cry. And for the first time, I started wondering if love was enough to make this work. After the nightmare at Linda's house, Grace and I were in an awkward limbo. We didn't talk much about what had happened, and whenever I brought it up, she'd change the subject or say, "I'll talk to her soon." Days turned into a week, and nothing had changed. Then one evening, Grace dropped a bomb on me. "My mom thinks I should go stay with her for a while," she said hesitantly as we sat on the couch. I almost choked on my drink. "What? Why?" "She just wants to talk things over," Grace said, not meeting my eyes. "Talk things over? Grace, she doesn't want to talk. She wants to control you." Grace sighed, fidgeting with her hands. "I know she was out of line, but she's still my mom. She says she wants to help us figure things out." "Help?" I said, incredulous. "Grace, she thinks I'm not good enough for you. How is that helping?" "She's just worried about me," Grace said quietly. "She doesn't want me to make a mistake." I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around it. "You don't actually think this is a good idea, do you?" Grace hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe it'll calm her down. Maybe if I spend some time with her, she'll see how much you mean to me. Or she'll use that time to convince you to leave me," I said, my frustration building. Grace didn't respond. Instead, she looked at the floor, and I could tell her mind was already made up. The next day, she packed a small bag and left for her parents' house. She said it was just for a few days, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Linda had gotten exactly what she wanted. At first, Grace texted me like everything was fine. "Mom's being nice," she wrote one evening. "She's not bringing up the ring or the fight." I didn't believe that for a second. Linda was many things, but letting things go wasn't one of them. Sure enough, a couple of days later, Grace's messages started to change. She was still polite, but she sounded distant. When I asked how things were going, she'd say things like, "Mom's just worried about us," or "She thinks we need more time to figure things out." What bothered me most wasn't just Linda's interference. It was Grace's willingness to go along with it. I knew she didn't agree with her mom deep down, but she never pushed back. It was like Linda had this invisible leash on her, and no matter how much Grace wanted to break free, she couldn't. One night, Grace called me from her parents' house. She sounded nervous, almost like she didn't want to be having the conversation. "Adam," she began, "Mom thinks we should slow things down." "Of course she does," I said bitterly. "What exactly does slow things down mean?" "She just thinks we rushed into the engagement," Grace said. "She thinks maybe we should take some time apart and figure out if we're really ready for marriage." I felt my stomach drop. "Grace, is this what you want, or is this just your mom talking?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I think maybe we do need some time. Things have been so stressful lately, and I don't know." "Of course things are stressful," I said, trying to stay calm. "Your mom's been stirring the pot since the day I proposed, and instead of shutting her down, you're doing everything she says." "That's not fair," Grace said, her voice trembling. "She's just trying to protect me." "Protect you from what?" I snapped. "From being happy? From having a life outside of her control?" Grace didn't respond. After a long pause, she said, "I just need a little more time to think." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Fine," I said finally. The next few days were quiet. Grace barely texted, and when she did, it was short and vague. I could feel the distance growing between us, and I knew Linda was behind it. One night, I got a call from Ethan, the same friend who'd introduced me to Grace. He'd heard about the fight from one of Grace's friends. "Man, I hate to say it," Ethan said, "but it sounds like her mom's trying to sabotage this whole thing." "Yeah, no kidding," I said. "What are you gonna do?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I love Grace, but I can't keep fighting her mom for control of our relationship. And it's not like Grace is standing up for me." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "You gotta figure out if Grace is really on your side, man. If she's not, then what's the point?" He was right, but it wasn't that simple. I wanted to believe Grace would come around, that she'd see what her mom was doing and finally stand up to her. But the longer she stayed at her parents' house, the less I believed that would happen. A few days later, Grace called me again. I didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "I don't know if I did the right thing by taking a break. I don't know what else to do." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Grace didn't know what to do because she'd spent her whole life being told what to do. Linda had made every major decision for her. And now, when it really mattered, Grace couldn't break free. "Grace," I said, my voice softer now, "I love you, but I can't marry someone who lets their mom control their life. I need you to choose, me or her." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "I need time," she finally said. "Take all the time you need, but don't expect me to wait around while your mom decides how our relationship should go." We hung up, and I sat there, staring at my phone, wondering if I'd just ended things for good. Deep down, though, I knew the truth. Linda had already done that for us. A week after Grace told me she needed time, I hit my limit. The silence between us had stretched so long, it felt like we weren't even a couple anymore. Every day that passed, I couldn't stop thinking about how Linda had completely taken over. Grace wasn't acting like the woman I fell in love with. She was acting like a puppet, and Linda was pulling the strings. Then Grace texted me. "Can we talk tonight? Mom says we should all sit down and figure this out." I stared at my phone, dumbfounded. The nerve of Linda to insert herself into a conversation that should have been between Grace and me. I fired back, "This isn't about your mom, it's about us. I'll come by, but only because I need to say my piece." That evening, I drove to her parents' house feeling equal parts angry and defeated. I wasn't sure what I was walking into, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Linda talk to me like she had before. When I arrived, Grace was waiting by the door. She looked nervous, wringing her hands like she was trying to hold herself together. "Thanks for coming," she said quietly. "Let's just get this over with," I replied, walking past her into the living room. Linda was sitting on the couch like she owned the world, with Mike beside her, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Grace sat down next to her mom, leaving me to take the chair across from them. The setup felt like a bad job interview, and I already knew who wasn't getting hired. Linda spoke first. "Adam, we're glad you're here. This has been a stressful time for Grace, and we want to make sure she's making the right decisions for her future." I clenched my jaw. "This isn't about Grace's future. This is about you controlling her life." Linda's smile didn't falter, but her tone turned sharper. "I'm her mother. It's my job to make sure she's taken care of." "And what about my job as her fiancé?" I shot back. "Or does that not count because I didn't buy a ring big enough for your standards?" Grace flinched but didn't say anything. Linda, however, leaned forward like she'd been waiting for this moment. "It's not about the size of the ring, Adam. It's about what it represents. A man who can't invest in a proper engagement ring clearly doesn't take marriage seriously." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean a man who doesn't go into debt to impress you? Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? You want me to prove myself to you, not Grace." Linda didn't deny it. "If you're going to marry my daughter, you have to show me that you're capable of giving her the life she deserves." "And what about what Grace wants?" I asked, turning to her. "Do you even care about that?" Grace opened her mouth to speak, but Linda cut her off. "Of course I care about what Grace wants. That's why I'm here, to guide her." "Guide her?" I said, my voice rising. "Linda, you don't guide her. You control her. And Grace, you let her. You let her dictate everything, even our relationship." Grace finally spoke, her voice shaky. "I just don't want to upset her." "And what about upsetting me?" I asked. "Do my feelings matter at all in this? Or is this just about keeping your mom happy?" "Adam, it's not that simple," Grace said, tears welling up in her eyes. "It is that simple," I said. "You either want to marry me or you don't. And if you do, then you need to stand up to her." Linda let out a short laugh. "You're giving her an ultimatum? That's rich. You're acting like you're doing her a favor by marrying her." "I'm not giving her an ultimatum," I said, glaring at Linda. "I'm giving her a choice. Either she chooses me and our future together, or she chooses to stay under your thumb. But I won't be part of this toxic dynamic anymore." The room went silent. Mike looked like he wanted to crawl under the couch, and Grace looked like she was on the verge of breaking down. Linda, however, stayed calm. "Grace," Linda said, turning to her daughter, "you need to think about this carefully. Marriage is a big decision, and it's clear Adam isn't ready to make any concession." "Stop talking for her," I snapped. "Grace, this is your decision. What do you want?" Grace looked at me, then at her mom, then back at me. Her lips trembled as she said, "I don't know." Those 3 words hit me harder than I expected. I realized then that Grace wasn't going to choose me, not because she didn't love me, but because she didn't know how to stand up to her mom. "I think we're done here," I said, standing up. "Grace, I love you, but I can't keep fighting this battle alone. You need to figure out what you really want, without your mom telling you what to think." "Adam, wait," Grace said, grabbing my arm. "I just need more time." I shook my head. "You've had time, Grace, and all it's done is push us further apart." Linda stood up, her expression smug. "Well, if you're leaving, don't expect to come crawling back when you realize you've made a mistake." I turned to her, my voice steady. "The only mistake I made was thinking I could win Grace's love without your interference. I'm done playing this game, Linda. I hope one day Grace realizes how much damage you've done." I walked out without looking back, my heart heavy, but my mind clear. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I'd taken back control of my life. Whether Grace chose to stay under Linda's thumb or not, I knew I couldn't let myself be dragged down by her mother's toxicity any longer. The next morning, my phone started buzzing. Grace texted me a long message apologizing, but it wasn't the kind of apology I needed. It was full of excuses. "I'm sorry you felt that way. And Mom didn't mean to come off so harsh." She even wrote, I just need time to get her to understand where we're coming from. Where we're coming from. There was no we in that room last night. It was me versus her mom, with Grace sitting on the sidelines. I didn't reply right away. Honestly, I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her to stop trying to fix things if she wasn't willing to take a stand, but another part of me just didn't want to deal with it anymore. By the afternoon, Grace was calling. I let it ring. She left a voicemail, her voice shaky. Adam, please call me back. I want to talk about last night. I know things got heated, but we can work through this. I know we can. Could we, though? Every time I replayed the night in my head, all I could see was her silence. I'd stood up for myself, for us, and she just sat there letting her mom dictate the terms of our relationship. The days that followed felt like a blur. Grace kept trying to reach out, alternating between apologizing and justifying her mom's behavior. She'd text things like, "Mom just wants the best for me," or "She's always been like this, but she'll come around." But I wasn't buying it. Linda wasn't going to come around. She'd spent Grace's entire life controlling her, and Grace let her because it was easier than standing up to her. One evening, Ethan came over to check on me. He'd heard bits and pieces of what had happened from our mutual friends, and he wanted to get the full story. "So, you really called off the engagement?" he asked as he plopped onto my couch. "Yep," I said, handing him a beer. I couldn't do it anymore. Her mom was running the show, and Grace wasn't even trying to stop her. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You sure Grace wasn't just caught off guard? Maybe she needed more time to figure things out." "That's the thing, though," I said, sitting across from him. "This isn't new. Her mom's been controlling her forever, and Grace just lets it happen. She doesn't push back. She doesn't even try. How am I supposed to marry someone who can't stand up for me? Or herself?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's rough, man. But you really think it's over? You guys were solid before all this." "Were we, though?" I asked. "Or was I just ignoring the red flags because I loved her?" He didn't have an answer for that. And honestly, neither did I. A few days later, the rumors started. I got a call from a friend of mine, Sarah, who's also friends with Grace. "You know Linda's been talking about you, right?" Sarah said, her voice low like she was sharing a secret. "Of course she is," I said, rolling my eyes. "What's she saying now?" "She's telling people you're too cheap to provide for Grace, and that you embarrassed her family by walking out," Sarah said. "She's making it sound like you're some broke loser who bailed on Grace because you couldn't handle the pressure." I laughed, but it wasn't because it was funny. Of course she is. Linda can't accept that someone would actually stand up to her. She has to make me the bad guy. "Honestly, some people are seeing through it," Sarah said. "Everyone knows how controlling Linda is. But I thought you should know what's going around." "Thanks, Sarah," I said. "I appreciate it." When I hung up, I felt a mix of anger and exhaustion. Linda wasn't just ruining Grace's life. She was trying to ruin mine too. But the more I thought about it, the less I cared. Let her talk. I wasn't going to waste my energy fighting a battle I'd already walked away from. A week later, Grace showed up at my apartment unannounced. When I opened the door, she looked like she'd been crying. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the couch, clutching her hands in her lap like she was afraid they'd fly away. "I'm sorry," she said after a long pause. "I'm sorry for not standing up for you. I know I should have, but it's just so hard with my mom." "I get that," I said, sitting across from her. "But Grace, this isn't just about your mom. This is about us. I need a partner who has my back. And that night, you didn't." "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I let you down, but I love you, Adam. I don't want to lose you." "I love you too," I said, my voice soft. "But love isn't enough if you're not willing to fight for us. Your mom's always going to be in the picture, and if you can't stand up to her now, how will you stand up to her when we're married? When we have kids?" Grace didn't have an answer. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face. "Grace," I said gently, "I need you to take a hard look at this situation, not just for me, but for yourself. Do you really want to spend the rest of your life living in your mom's shadow?" She nodded slowly. "I know you're right," she said, "but I don't know how to change. You have to figure that out," I said. "But I can't be the one to do it for you." She left that night, and I knew it was the last time we'd talk as a couple. Linda tried to contact me once, sending a text that read, "If you'd just apologize, we could all move past this." I deleted it without replying. After I walked away from Grace and Linda, I didn't expect to hear much about what happened to them. I thought I'd left that chapter behind for good. But life has a funny way of keeping you connected to things you're trying to let go of. A few weeks after I returned the engagement ring, Sarah, our mutual friend, reached out again. "Hey," she said over the phone, "you're not going to believe what Linda's up to now." I sighed, already tired of hearing Linda's name. "What now?" "She's trying to set Grace up with this guy," Sarah said. "Some rich guy she met through one of her charity events. He's older, like mid-40s, and apparently loaded. That sounds about right, I said bitterly. Linda's dream. A guy with a fat wallet who doesn't care about anything else. Sarah lowered her voice, as if Grace might overhear her. Grace isn't into it, though. She's been telling Linda she doesn't want to meet him, but you know how Linda is. She won't take no for an answer. It didn't surprise me. Linda had always treated Grace's life like it was a chessboard, and Grace was just another piece she could move around to suit her own goals. A month later, I ran into Ethan at the gym. He mentioned that Grace had moved out of her parents' house. Wait, what? I asked, dropping the weights I'd been holding. Yeah, apparently Linda kicked her out, Ethan said. I couldn't believe it. She kicked her out? Why? From what I heard, Grace finally put her foot down about that rich guy Linda wanted her to date, Ethan said. She refused to even meet him, and Linda flipped out. Told her if she wasn't going to listen, she wasn't welcome in the house anymore. Wow, I said, shaking my head. I mean, I knew Linda was controlling, but that's next level. Ethan shrugged. Honestly, it might be the best thing that's ever happened to Grace. At least now she has to figure things out on her own, without Linda breathing down her neck. I wanted to agree, but a part of me felt sorry for Grace. She'd spent her entire life trying to please her mom, only to get tossed aside when she didn't fit into Linda's plans anymore. Over the next few weeks, bits and pieces of Grace's new life started trickling back to me through mutual friends. She'd moved into a small apartment downtown and was looking for a new job, something in the art world finally. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Apparently, Linda wasn't done making things difficult for Grace. She'd been bad-mouthing her to family and friends, saying things like, I did everything for her, and this is how she repays me. One of Grace's cousins even told me that Linda had tried to cut Grace off financially. She thinks if Grace struggles enough, she'll come crawling back, the cousin said. That sounded exactly like something Linda would do. Use money as a leash to try to drag Grace back into line. But from what I heard, Grace wasn't biting. She was working odd jobs, selling some of her art online, and doing whatever she could to make ends meet. One day, I got a text from Grace. My heart skipped for a moment seeing her name pop up after weeks of silence. The message read, Hey, can we talk? I really need someone right now. I stared at my phone, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I replied, What's going on? She called almost immediately, her voice trembling. Adam, I'm so sorry for everything. You were right about my mom. She's been impossible. She kicked me out because I wouldn't meet this guy she's trying to set me up with. I sighed, the familiar mix of frustration and pity bubbling up. Grace, I'm sorry you're going through that, but I don't know what you want from me. I told you this would happen if you didn't stand up to her. I know, she said quickly, her voice breaking. I know I messed up, and I should have defended you, but I'm trying to fix things now. I'm trying to figure out my life, and I just need someone to talk to. Grace, I said, trying to keep my tone steady. I'm glad you're starting to see the problem, but you didn't choose me when it mattered. You let your mom push me away. I can't be the person who picks up the pieces now. She went quiet for a moment, then said, I understand. I don't know who else to turn to. It hurt to hear her say that. I'd wanted to be her person for so long, but now it felt like too little, too late. You'll figure it out, I said softly. You're stronger than you think, but you need to do this on your own. A few months later, I heard through the grapevine that Linda had finally stopped trying to control Grace's life, or at least scaled back. Grace had gone no contact with her mom for a while, which I imagine was the wake-up call Linda needed. But even if Linda did try to patch things up, I doubted their relationship would ever be the same. As for me, I'd moved on. I wasn't dating anyone seriously yet, but I was taking my time figuring out what I wanted in a partner. One thing was for sure. I wasn't going to settle for someone who let other people dictate their life. Looking back, I don't regret calling off the engagement. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. Grace needed to break free from her mom's control, and I couldn't do that for her. She had to do it on her own, in her own time.